What's up, my Yugi Bros? I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0. Welcome to Yugioh and Business Casual. So the presidential inauguration is coming up, and that's having me think a lot about losing. It's a pretty important concept to think of in the game of Yugioh, because realistically, you're gonna do it a lot. Having a good solid grasp of losing is going to be important to about half of the games that you ever play in your lifetime. I mean, we're not all Billy Brake. On this week's episode of The Competitive Spirit, I'm going to be talking about how to lose, but today I want to talk about when to lose, specifically the strategic notion of scooping. Now, a lot of players have a seemingly noble, never scoop response to the idea of losing, the idea that a game continues until a player loses their last life points. Frequently, when you are testing and when you are learning the game, this is a very good philosophy to have, but once you're in a competitive event, it may actually be useful to consider scooping your cards up earlier than you might expect to otherwise. So today, I want to talk about 4 factors that you should consider when deciding whether to scoop up your cards or continue a game. The first is the fairly obvious one, which is how likely it is that you're going to win. There are players who never scoop even when they're in a no-win situation, and there are players that will scoop every time they see a no-win situation. Most situations, though, aren't actually a for-sure win or lose. Oftentimes, there are small factors in the game and small possibilities or probabilities that you can come out as a winner. One of those that I try not to rely on, because when you're playing in a competitive event, you're hoping to play against players for whom this will not be a factor, but there is always a possibility that your opponent misplays considerably. If your opponent screws up badly enough, they could be in the best situation possible and still lose. If you play in a way that tries to make your opponent misplay, there's still a possibility that even in a no-win situation or a no-win situation that you are going to win. This, like I said, is not something that you should rely on, since most really good players are going to see through this, or are not going to make the kind of critical misplay that you're relying on. Other times, there is a possibility that you will be able to get the combo or the set of cards that you need in order to play out of a really bad situation, and there is a way to do this properly and a way to not do this properly, and unfortunately the way to do it properly is not the way that we usually do. The way that we usually think about the probability of our getting the combo that we need in order to win the game is us thinking about what we have to draw into to win the game as it stands right now. But usually when you're in a losing situation, it's because you can't get into that combo very quickly, which means that you're going to have to give your opponent an extra turn to play before you actually get that combo, which means that what you should be doing is thinking about whether or not that combo will get you out of the turn that your opponent will be able to play next. And this should be true no matter how effectively you think that you can stall for a turn. You should also always consider the joint probability of conditions that you need in order to get out of your current situation. That means if you have to draw into multiple cards or search into multiple cards, then considering the joint probability that you get those cards, or the probability that you succeed in a move that you need to do in order to get out of a situation, which includes the possibility that your opponent has the out. These things are all much lower than normal when you're in a losing situation, just by merit of what a losing situation looks like in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Once you've considered these probabilities, once you have considered the probability that you can win this game, now there are a couple of extra thoughts that you need to keep in mind when deciding whether or not to scoop at that point. The first is a benefit for continuing the game. The longer you continue a game, the longer you gain information about your opponent's deck. As the game goes on, your opponent gives away more information about their deck. Especially in Game 1, this can be crucial. The more you know about your opponent's deck, the better you can prepare for the next game, and the better you can prepare your side deck. You can even bluff your opponent into thinking your deck plays differently from the way that it actually does by playing through an obviously losing situation. Once again, this is something I wouldn't rely on too much in the higher tiers of competitive play, but it is a strategy that you can employ. There is a flip side to this, which is the third factor that I would talk about, which is the fact that you are giving away information about your deck as you play more. Consider this: when you are in a losing situation, you have to do a lot more work to continue a game than you do when you're in a winning situation. If you have an unbreakable board, you don't really have to move that board around very much in order to continue the play. But if your opponent has an unbreakable board and you have like 2 cards available that can do something about it, you have to play all of your most significant cards in order to get out of that situation, or in order to continue the game in that situation, which means that usually the longer you play in a losing situation, you are actually going to be giving away more information about your own deck than about your opponent's. As an example of why this may be relevant, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience in Seattle Regionals when I was playing against Metal Foes. My opponent won the die roll and chose to go first, which means that they didn't know at first that I was playing a go second deck. My opponent then proceeded to make a Spark Jowgen combo. Now, I at the time was not running Raigeki, and that this was fairly common at the time. I was also not running Forbidden Chalice in my main deck, because those were not things that you necessarily had to have in order to win in this particular format. I was maining Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, which was something that I had chosen for some of my other matchups, specifically my ABC matchup. This meant that there was absolutely no way that I was going to be playing out of Spark Jowgen. I could just think through my plays and know that my biggest plays required special summoning, my other plays required something like Neptibus, which I would have to be able to mill an infantry off of Neptibus, get that effect, and then also be able to summon Dragoons to run over the Jowgen in order to get rid of it that turn. It just wasn't going to happen. So at this point, my opponent had played through their first turn. I knew what deck they were playing. I knew how they played. I was sitting there with a hand that I couldn't play, and I had given away zero information about because my opponent had chosen to go first for themselves. At this point, it was actually way more strategic in order for me to just scoop up my cards, go to game 2, put in my side deck, and my opponent knew nothing about my deck, which means that they could not prepare for the next game, but I could, which gave me a huge chance of going into game 3 and being successful. This is a very extreme version, but there are less extreme cases in which the same holds true, where you serve to lose more from continuing a game than you serve to gain. There is one final factor when you are considering whether to continue a game, and this one is very, very important. That one's time. Games that you drag out to the very last life point can take a very long time, even if you are losing the entire time and have no chance of winning. There are times when there is a very high likelihood that you are going to lose, but you know that you're going to get a game 3 where you want to scoop up your cards simply because your deck does not have a good matchup against their deck in time. Remember that if you scoop, you get to choose who goes first, which means that you get a certain advantage in game 3. So not only are you putting yourself in the situation where you aren't going to have to deal with time, but you're also putting yourself in an advantageous position for your final game, which, if you win the match. So as you see, there are times when it is important to continue a game even when you think you're losing, and there are costs to consider when considering continuing a game that may make you want to actually scoop up your cards even if there is a slim possibility that you can win that game. So what do you all think? Let me know in the comment section below if you think that there are some reasons to scoop or to not scoop that I haven't talked about. This is talking about in competitive play when you're actually in an event. And what do you think of the points that I brought up? Let me know in the comment section below. In the meantime, I hope you all liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. And of course, subscribe and hit the bell for more decks, discussion, analysis, and general Yu-Gi-Oh! Shenanigans. Thank you all for watching. I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See you guys.